So I guess I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Susan Huff with the Soup Shop. Lots of S's. We have soups, salads, spreads. It keeps going. We keep missing a lot of S's on there. But I'm happy to be here tonight to talk a little bit about cobblers, crisp, cakes, a little bit about baking. But I want to start the entire class off with letting you know I am not a baker. I'm not even a good baker. I'm not a talented baker. Bakers are precise and they measure and they're calculated. And I'm not really good at that kind of stuff. So I think it's perfect to teach the class for something that I had to learn how to do without all the exact measurements, because I'm not really good at weighing and I'm not really good at scraping and measuring and doing perfect. But I have learned about the types of ingredients that make it easier and make it simple. And I even looked up a little bit of research. I'm like, okay, what makes a cobbler? What makes it a crisp? What makes it a crumble? What makes it a cake? And basically all chefs just argue about what a cobbler or a crisp or a crumble is. So I've just found out it's just what you want to call it and how you want to make it. The most important thing about making any of these things is to enjoy it, to have fun with it, and to get creative with it. Mostly I'm really all about using local. In fact, the apples you have in front of you were donated from a Bent Mountain farm from Glen Reed. So they're actually Bent Mountain apples, which is kind of cool. So I've been making a lot of things at the shop with local fruits. So when peaches come in, we make a lot of things with peaches. When the berries come in, we make a lot of things with berries. When the apples come in, now we're making a lot of things with apples. So it's important to really think about what's being grown in my area, what's local, what's seasonal, because it's always going to have the best flavor. It's always going to be the easiest to find. And it's always going to be, here, I'll pull this back just a little bit. Hey, sorry about that. And it's always going to be better if you're supporting the local, the farmer, and the seasonal, and the flavor is going to be twice as good, always. So I'm going to start off a little bit by showing you some of the things that I do. But the most important thing is to get started with quality ingredients. So besides the quality ingredients, it's also, one of the things I did learn at the beginning is called mise en place. Does anybody know what mise en place means? Okay, good. She's got it. Yeah, some people do. Mise en place means have all the things you need in one area. That will save you all the headaches in the world. So your spices, your ingredients, your flours, whatever you're going to have for your crumble or your cobbler or your cake, whatever it is, it's really important to, if you use a recipe like I do, I pretty much look at it and go, okay, got that. Now I'll get started. So then I gather my things to one area. So to begin with, have your things in one area. And what I want to show you that I do at home is I have a thing a little bit smaller than this, but I keep all of my ingredients that I used to bake with in this all the time. Like I'll have my baking powder, my baking soda, my flour, my salt, and my nutmeg and my cinnamon, and I keep it all in a container. That way when I'm ready to make a cobbler or a crisp or a crumble or whatever I'm making, it's sort of all here. I do the same in the refrigerator. I have another one, and I have my butter, everything, my eggs, and I keep it all in a container. So that way it's sort of, I have to go, oh yeah, I forgot. Oh yeah, I need. And then you sort of have it all there. And I sort of categorize things like that for most of the things that I make at home, even if it's soup. If it's one recipe, I'll have all my things in one container and a list of the things that maybe are unrefrigerated that you need to pull out of the refrigerator. So that helps a lot because invariably you'll go, oh, I don't have nutmeg. I forgot that. But there's also this thing in baking that I choose to do is say, I don't have nutmeg. I'm just going to add a little more cinnamon. Or, I don't have, you have to have flour, of course, and you have to have eggs, of course, and you have to have milk, of course. But there's some things that you don't have to have the exact ingredient. They call for Grand Marnier, and they call for orange zest, or they call for a little bit of lemon peel. A lot of that adds flavor, and a lot of it adds color, and a lot of it makes it better. But it doesn't mean you have to be married to the exact recipe complete ingredients. So you can shift things just a little bit. unless you're a really good baker, and then you don't shift anything. You do it exactly as it says on there. My husband's sister is a really good baker, and she literally measures out gram and scrapes it off with a knife to the exact gram measurement for everything. She tried to teach me to bake bread one day, and I was like, I don't think that's going to be happening in my house. So that was a pass. I think when you make bread, you probably have to be a little more precise. Of course, I watched my grandmother make bread all the time. And she's like, Susie, it's 3, 3, and 3. And I'm like, I still don't even remember, but she was like 3 cups of flour and 3 this and 3. So she would just use 3 ingredients to make bread. And so then I think it's a lot easier if you keep it simple. So some of the things I want to share with you. And I feel this room is so big. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm just in this giant aquarium sort of thing. I have to put my glasses on to read. Excuse me. I've got old eyes. So there's really no difference between cobbler, crisp, crumb cake. It's how you make it. Cobblers are really more putting the fruit on the bottom. And then you pour the pie dough, as they used to call it, or the crust, if you might want to call it, or the bread topping, or the biscuit topping. It can be pretty much interchangeable, but what I have found is I froze a lot of blackberries and blueberries that we picked early in the season, and I started making peach and berry cobbler for the shop. And I had to go through a little bit of learning sequence because I didn't make as many cobblers before. But what I learned is when I take my baking sheet, and of course my pan for the shop is a lot bigger, but I'd put the peaches, the berries, and the blackberries in the bottom, unsugared. You don't need a lot of sugar when you're using really good fruit. So, but I found if I poured my dough, I make a biscuit topping on mine. If I poured my biscuit topping or my dough on top without cooking the berries a little bit, it was a little too mushy. So sometimes you just have to figure out by doing it, by trial and error. I'm not a big cornstarch fan. I just don't like to use it. I don't like to use corn, and especially cornstarch. It's usually not the healthiest product in the world, but if you like cornstarch, it will thicken things up, and it will thicken your fruit, and it will make it a little more solid. You can also use Instaclear gel. You can order this on Amazon, and it will help thicken and bind the fruits together if you have more watery fruit, like the berries. Peaches aren't as watery. They're a little bit more. Apples aren't nearly as watery. You don't really have to use it as much. It's just the more moisture in a fruit, you might need a little bit of that. What I have found is the 2 tricks is when I put the fruit in the pan, again, you can put crust on the bottom, then fruit, then crust on top, or biscuit dough on the bottom and fruit, and biscuit dough on the top. It all bakes really well if you bake it low and slow. But I also use dry cranberries. I love it to use in my apple cake, and you'll taste that tonight. But you can mix the dry cranberries in with the fruit, and it kind of absorbs some of that moisture, so it bakes a lot more evenly. How many of you here like biscuit topping? Okay, so good. Biscuit topping is great. Biscuit topping works wonderfully. It's an easy topping to make, and you can just pour it right over the fruit, and you can bake it. And I don't add, at the shop, we sell a ton of it, and I don't add any sugar to it at all. So, and it sells really well. If you'll notice the recipes that I sent you, I altered all these recipes by other people's recipes because I'm not a good recipe writer. And I cut the sugar in half, and I tried each one, and it was perfectly fine. So I just took the sugar content that they had and cut it exactly in half, and it didn't make any difference to me. And I don't think it made any difference in the quality. So, you know, you can choose to do what you want. But when you look at a recipe, often you can question the amount of sugar in there depending on your taste. But there's a trick, especially with fruit. Toppings. Well, okay, let me go back. I'm backing up myself. Flour. Flour is probably one of the things I did have to learn about. And I actually watched a whole movie on flours. And all-purpose flour is probably one of the worst flours you can use. It's basically the dregs of, they take out all the good stuff, and then whatever's left over, and they package it up, and they call it all-purpose. It's called the leftovers. It's the dregs of all the good flours left over. And it has basically almost nothing in it. If you have to use all-purpose, at least get a good brand like King Arthur or something like that. It'll help you with baking. And I really prefer to use local companies. I use Deep Roots Milling. because it's a local Roanoke company, farmer, miller, excuse me. And I have found if you're not the best baker in the world, to get either pastry flour or bread flours, they make it much easier. So what I've learned, how many people use pastry flour? No? Just bread flour or all-purpose? All-purpose, yep, okay. So all-purpose has a medium protein content. A wheat flour will have a really heavy protein content. So it makes things denser and heavier and harder to work with. A pastry flour will have a very light protein content. Like this pastry flour has 5 to 7% protein, which makes things bake up light and easy. So you don't have to be as good of a baker. If you use like King Arthur all-purpose, it has around a 10% protein. Still easier. But if you just use the run-of-the-mill all-purpose cheapest flour you can buy, it's usually about a 12 to 15% protein content. So the higher the protein, doesn't mean the bread's not going to be good and wonderful, and you can make some great rye or some great, that German thick stout bread. They're perfect for that, but they're harder to make cobblers or cakes or things that you want a little more lighter, a little bit more fluffy. So I'm really all about the good flour, and I'm really all about the good grain. So I don't use any grains for my toppings that aren't organic and aren't pretty good. Like, I don't know why they even sell this thing called Quick Oats. Like, Quick Oats is just pureed oatmeal that's pretty much garbage, So I use only whole oats and get them from a reputable company. Nuts are a great thing to add with crisp, cobblers, cakes, any of that. Pick your nuts of your choice. Remember to keep your nuts refrigerated because nuts can go rancid. They're sort of like oils. They can go rancid bad. So make sure you keep them in the freezer or the refrigerator. I chop mine lightly, but adding nuts to your cakes and cobblers, remember it's going to create another texture. So I have a cobbler back here that's just berries with a biscuit topping, and it worked out perfect. But when I tried to add the nuts to the apple cake, it just didn't work as well. So I did the apples, and I added a few cranberries, and then I did the cake on top of it. But it'd be very easy to make it a crumble. What do you do to make it a crumble? Or a crisp? You put something on top of it. So to make a crisp or a crumble, you'll taste my apple cake later. It's layered with the apples, and I'll show you in just a minute how I did that. And then I poured the same cake mix, not cobbler, that's a biscuit mix. So I used a biscuit type dough for that. Then I put a cake mix that I made myself on top of that. But if you want it to be a crisp, and some people like crispy, crunchy toppings, and some people like soft, fluffy cakes. Kind of up to you. But if you want that crisp, crunchy topping, I basically take oats, a little bit of brown sugar, a little bit of butter, and just meal it up. You can add nuts then. That's perfect for the pecans or walnuts, or get crazy and put some pumpkin seeds in there. It's fun to make it kind of holiday, fall, festival-y. But if you just take a bowl, stainless steel bowl like this, and you can just mix up a little bit of butter, a little bit of brown sugar, a little bit of nuts, just make it to where it's crumbly, and then you just sprinkle it right on top. I always add oatmeal because it just sort of makes it go a little bit further, and you don't have to use as much sugar. So, and I think it looks pretty because when you kind of crisp it up at the top, it looks really nice to have the meal on there. But you can use a different kind of grain if you'd like to as well. The best thing that my mother is not a baker either, and she loves my granola, and we sell a lot of it. She says, Susie, the best thing I do is, because she gets a lot of my granola, obviously, is she just pours the granola right on top of it. And that makes it fancy and pretty, and she doesn't have to do anything, and she doesn't have to make a topping. So if you don't want to get the butter and the sugar and the oats and all that on top of it, and chop up your nuts, you just get a bag of granola and sprinkle it right on top, and it works perfect. You can also take the granola and use it on the bottom as a crust. So if you want a crust on the bottom of your cobbler, it's just like doing a torte or a cake or anything. You can also use this and just put it right on the bottom. But I also just explained how to make a crisp with the butter and the sugar and the oats and the nuts. You can also make a crust just like that. You don't have to buy my granola, but I'd rather you buy my granola. I'm just teasing. So that's some suggestions of things you can do. But quality flour, I have found, makes all the difference. The second thing is this tool. How many of you have a really good whisk? To get your flour and whatever if you're adding salt or baking soda or baking powder or whatever it is, really whisk those good together. Don't just add them and sort of kind of mix it with a spoon. It doesn't really make it soft and light. So whisk your flours and your salt and your baking soda and your baking powder. That makes it light and fluffy and really good mixed. So it's not kind of, because baking soda can actually even chunk in places. And then it really ruins your dessert for people to bite into a little piece of baking soda. Doesn't taste that great. So this is a great tool. Another one that I want to share, because maybe I'm just old school. I think it's because I'm lazy. But I just, the big KitchenAid mixers, they're just heavy and they're bulky and they're a pain to clean. And they just, unless you're a bread maker, if you're a bread maker, I think you have to have one. But they're just a pain. So I just still love my old-fashioned, handmade, a little made, my mixer. So if I'm going to mix my eggs and my milk and my butter or olive oil. For me, on any of these recipes, if you don't have good butter, use olive oil. I love the Amish butter. I will use it every time. But I'm not going to go buy, something from the grocery store that comes in sticks and they call it butter and it's not really even halfway butter. Never margarine. Margarine, I don't even know why they even have it in a grocery store. It's not a consumable item to me. It's definitely not butter. But if you can get good butter, I say definitely use that. And if you can't get good butter, you can equally exchange any butter for the exact amount of olive oil in any of your recipes, and it comes out perfect. But I love my hand mixer because it's sort of like a cordless tool almost. You can get over there and get into things, and then you can just stick it under the sink and wash it, take these off. It's not like you're hauling this 40-pound machine thing where you're going to go. And I don't know, pulling it up and getting in there. And there's a hunk that's not quite blended up, and you got to lift it up and it starts dripping everywhere, and you got to get that one hunk in there. This is just a lot easier to me. And they're, what, $20 bucks, not 200. So that's just my food for thought. I love this thing. Obviously, you do have to measure a little bit. So when it comes to flours or milks or eggs, also get local eggs as often as you can, please. And we have so many eggs here. There's no reason to buy them from the grocery store. But when I measure, be careful with your measuring cup. You know where you are. And then when you're mixing, you're going to also mix with your whisk. I love scoops. Whoops. I'm getting caught in things. Okay here, Josh? So I love scoops. I have scoops in every size. And my husband knows we use these to scoop out soups with. We use to scoop out dressings with. We use everything. To me, the scoops just make it easier. When I go into salt or when I go into dips or anything I go into, scoops are just easy to grab it rather than a spoon. I mean, I use spoons, but I use scoops almost all the time for everything. And even just ladling soup into a pot, I use a bigger scoop than this, obviously, but I use that. Couple things I want to share. Are we having everybody's looking at me. They don't have any questions yet. Usually we have some questions. Anybody have questions? Yeah.
So you're talking about flours. Mm-hmm. How about gluten-free, like almond flour?
I've used it before. I'm not a great baker, so it's harder to work with. And the thing is, when gluten, is a touchy subject for me, because I do believe there's definitely a big intolerance for gluten, because we use enriched products and we use products that are completely dead and they've been sprayed with Roundup. And if you're using just plain wheat flour from the grocery store or enriched flour from the grocery store or enriched pasta or enriched rice or enriched any of the white enriched stuff, you are getting so much Roundup in your system you have no idea. And that causes huge gluten issues. So it's not necessarily the gluten that's in the product, because gluten actually, if you go historically back and read it, is good for you. It creates good bacteria. But gluten that's been ruined by bad farming practices, our bad processing practices, are the way they create the food. It's processed foods that are using really cheap, horrible products that have been enriched. Why do you enrich something? Because there's nothing left in it. It's the only reason they don't need to enrich it if there was anything in it. They enrich it with, let's take all the stuff we would throw away normally and enrich it and sell it. So when you're using products like these flours, you're getting much less gluten. Still, if you have celiac, I wouldn't touch this because I would just be scared for anybody like that. But if you're gluten sensitive, I would encourage you not to eat any processed products, not to eat any enriched products. Be careful of dry pastas, rice, grains that are not done from a really good company. So just source out companies. I just haven't found that I'm a good enough baker to use some of the almond. Plus, they're so pricey. They're pretty dang pricey. The almond flours, things like that. I should probably learn more about it, though. That's a good thing for me to learn more. Any other questions? Yeah.
When you're using the granola for your bottom crust, do you use butter or something with it
To bind it? It depends on what you're putting on top of it. If you're doing like a biscuit topping on top of it, it binds perfectly fine. I mean, a few pieces will fall out. You can add a little bit of oil if you want to. You can add a little bit of sugar if you want to. Remember, sugar is a connector as well. Sugar makes things crisp and hold. I don't usually normally, but you can if you want to. It's also good to kind of pack it down a little bit. So kind of, and if you have like a can of something, a can of beans or something, you can use that can to kind of pack it down a little bit. I often do that. I'll grab one of my big cans and kind of smush it down a little bit. But it works for bottom or top. Other questions? So flours, I'm picky on. Grains, I'm picky on. I'm picky on everything, aren't I? I'm really picky about the enriched thing. Yeah.
Have you ever tried using the einkorn flour? It's so picky.
I love einkorn flour.
But you have to really...
You have to use this tool. And I use a little more baking powder than what the recipe would call for and a little more baking soda. And I also, on recipes, this is just me, but if it calls for 2 eggs, I usually use 4. I like things lighter, fluffier, and a little more protein in them. So I want them healthier, so I'll add more eggs than they would ever say. But if you're a recipe follower, stick by the recipe. I'm just not a very good recipe follower. Never been a rule follower, and I've never been a recipe follower. Einkorn flour is one of the best flours you can use. It's really good for you. No farmer who grows einkorn usually would ever consider spraying Roundup. They're just einkorn, E-I-N-K-O-R-N flour. It's an ancient grain, kind of like teff or spelt. Einkorn's even older than some of the spelts and the dankons and the other flours. There's just hundreds of flours that are so good for you. But most of those growers are not as big company. I have Bluebird grains in the shop, and they have an einkorn mix and einkorn flours. So it's a really healthy grain. And most people who are gluten intolerant can eat the einkorn flour. But again, if you have celiac, just be very careful of everything, because that's a whole different game, whole different ballgame. One of the other things that I use for some of my clients, because if they're vegan or have intolerance to eggs. I have one girl who can't eat eggs. It's a protein bind connection something. I really love Bob Mills egg replacement. And also is really good to thicken things up with. So if you want to thicken your sauce with it, or you want to thicken your, if you feel like you made some biscuit topping and it looks a little loose or a little thin, you can add just a little bit of this. It's kind of like the anti-cornstarch, but it works good. And when you asked me about putting granola on the bottom, you can sprinkle a little of this right on top of it, and it sort of binds it. So it's sort of a healthy binder, and you can use it as a replacement for eggs. So vegans use this a lot. People who have intolerance to eggs use it a lot, and I use it a lot just because it works for a lot of different things. It's kind of like I said, the anti-cornstarch thing. So we've gone over some of those things. Let me see, where am I on my notes? Questions? Man. Always stop me if you have a question, because I'm very informal about this kind of stuff. So you can always switch out olive oil with butter. One thing I've learned in baking from my grandmother is buttermilk is always better than milk when you're using baking, to me. You can switch it out if you want to, but it makes it creamier, it makes it better. I don't find much grocery store buttermilk I like, but we sell Goshen, and there's other companies who sell good buttermilk. But once you find a good buttermilk, you want to keep that. It's great for making grits, and it's great for baking. It's great for making biscuit topping for cobblers or any kind of biscuits. But buttermilk just wins over. I don't know how we got out of buttermilk, but I guess they don't sell as much anymore. We always had buttermilk in the house growing up.
What about making your own buttermilk?
Yeah, and you can add vinegar to your, yeah. It works out great. What I have found is, like, when I get the Goshen buttermilk, it still has a lot of cream in it. So I think they don't quite strain it out as much. So even their milk, I look at it and I'm like, there's that much of that top of it that has cream. And the buttermilk has about the same too. So I see the cream in there, but you can definitely use vinegar to change your milk to buttermilk. So it's an easy process. I talked to you about the nut and fruit mix, the brown sugar. Dried fruit's another good way to make a great addition to your fruit. I'm not big on using canned fruit for cobblers. I know you want to make your cherry pies. If you have to, you have to. But I encourage you to use what's growing in season. These great apples that Glenn donated to us. What's in season, what's healthier, what's a little more natural. I don't know why people eat strawberries right now. They're just not in season in Virginia right now. And you're really having to get them from some faraway place that may be having a drought. So all those issues can come up. Lights are changing. So consider those things. The other thing too is remember that a little bit of salt amplifies sweetness. So when you don't use salt in any of your baking goods, your sweetness level actually goes down. The two work together. So a little bit of salt is always good in your baking mixes, anything you're making. Yeah.
Okay. For those who are really salt sensitive, can you use what they call the salt substitute? Salt is sodium chloride. Salt substitute is often potassium chloride. Just add a little bit more metallic taste to it.
Yeah, you can definitely do that, but I would encourage you to get a Himalayan pink sea salt, because if you have a Himalayan pink sea salt, it's actually going to do your body more good than no salt. Because if you have no salt in your body, there's no way for your body to absorb the minerals. So if you eliminate salt, which a lot of people do, and then I'm like, wait, your body's holding on to nothing. So you want to have the good salt, like pink Himalayan sea salt, any of the darker the color, the better the salt. If you go to France or you go to Italy or you go to places like that, you see some of their salts and they're almost black. The volcanic salts. Those are so. And if you take minerals, the good companies tell you add a little bit of sea salt to your water when you're taking this mineral, so you absorb it. So you can see if you're not having any salt in your water, often you're just drinking it in and it's going out. Your body's not hydrating. So a little bit of salt in your water, good salt, will actually hydrate your body. So it's better for you. Who knew, right? Let's see. So local fruit, local grains, have more fun with it. And so I'm going to show you one of the funnest things that I have with these local apples. How many of you have one of these? I love it. I never knew about this until I came to Virginia. This is a Virginia find. Because then I started using, in Florida, we don't have apples, so I didn't use very many apples. But now I make apple butter and apple chutney and apple cake and apple pie, and we've been making everything apple. So it took me a while to figure this machine out. My engineer husband had to show me how to actually work this, because I was like, I can't get this thing to work. But there's this little lever on the bottom, and once you figure this little lever down here to know how to pull it back. So I'm just going to take the apple, since most of you already know this, and stick it in this machine. Very easy. That's how I make the apple cake at the store. So once you get there, it's much, on this plastic table, this thing doesn't want to stick very good. But you're just going to spin your apple until it comes, and this thing doesn't want to stay down because it's not securing on there. Hold on. You know it's going to mess up on a class, right? It does perfect at home every time. And you're just going to, yeah, my apple went in wrong. My apple didn't go, right. Hold on. Yeah, I need the engineer again. So the engineer has to show me how to bring it back. And then you stick the apple in.
There you go.
There we go.
There you go. Got it straight?
I think so.
Okay, there you go.
See, he's good for something. He didn't laugh. Okay, so once you get this going, it really works really good at home, but it won't stick to this table is my biggest problem. So we're stuck halfway.
I would also say, yeah, they make one with the plant that goes on the table.
Yeah, that would probably work better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unstick myself here. So that's how you pull it off. But I got half of it done, so you'll get the idea. So what happens is the apple comes out in rings. In real life, it works. When you're in front of people, it doesn't. But it comes off in rings like this, and the whole thing peels, and then you just lay the rings out in the pan. And then what I do on mine is I add cranberries, a little bit of brown sugar, and then on top of that, I'll pour my cake topping, where I make a cake mix, not a biscuit mix. So the cake mix has a different amount of ratio of eggs, flour, and milk. And you'll see that in all the recipes. Let me see if this apple works. We'll try one more. I don't want to mess up an apple, though. I don't want to waste an apple. There, let's see if this just doesn't want to clamp on here. This one might work. Let's see. Yeah, she's going to work. So, of course, when you do a whole case of these, it's different. But you see, it's so pretty. And they come out all nice and even. And you just separate them and then you just lay them out in the pan. Sort of like this. And then you can sprinkle a little bit of brown sugar. You can sprinkle some dried cranberries. You can sprinkle some pecans. You can sprinkle some walnuts. You can do any kind of creative thing that you like here. You can chop up dates in here if you want to. You can put pumpkin seeds in here if you want to. Anybody have another suggestion? Something they think's fun? Anything you can put a little nutmeg in here if you want to, ginger. I'm a cinnamon fanatic because if you read about cinnamon, it has about 100 million good things for you and has nothing bad for you. And cinnamon makes things what? No, sweet. If you take cinnamon and put it on anything, it's going to get sweeter. Cinnamon oil is a really fun thing to have. You have to be very careful. 2 drops is a lot. But if you took 2 drops of cinnamon oil on your toast, you will think you have sprinkled 2 tablespoons of sugar on it. It will taste that sweet. So cinnamon's a great, if you don't want to use so much sugar, use more cinnamon. I sprinkle cinnamon on top of everything. I put cinnamon in my yogurt. I put cinnamon on top of my apples. It just makes everything really sweet tasting. So I use a ton of cinnamon. Let's see, what else I can say. A good flavor of cinnamon? I use Frontier brand because they're pretty always consistently good, and I like their cinnamon. Cinnamon can really range in price. You know, it's like vanilla. Vanilla beans are uber expensive, but there's 10 million tons of flavor in it. So vanilla is another one. You know, imitation vanilla, what does it tell you? It ain't vanilla. So you have to be very careful in knowing, am I going to spend on good quality things because I want my food to taste better? Or I'm going to buy the cheapest thing and just eat a ton of it because I never really get satiated. That's what happens to people. They end up buying Duncan Hines cake mix and just wanting more and more and more because they never really get enough flavor. So when you're using good spices and good condiments like good cinnamon, good vanilla, you get flavor in your food, and guess what? You get satiated, and you don't eat 4 of them. You eat 1, you're like, that was really good. I mean, it's like even when you have a really good piece of steak, you can just eat a small portion, and you're like, that tasted really good, and you feel good. You don't feel like you have to eat 20 pounds of it to get full. So it's not always about price, it's about quality, and the quality helps you really convert how you feel about getting satiated. Satiation is a big thing about weight and diet and ingesting and enjoying your food quality. So it's not, I know I don't want to say spend more, but just look for quality ingredients. because local apples are not that expensive, but they're super quality. But good cinnamon is a little bit more expensive. Good vanilla is a little bit more expensive. Good nutmeg, you know, the real whole thing is a little more expensive. So, but I think in the end, you'll be happy with it.
So where do you get things?
Excuse me?
So where do you buy them?
I have a wholesale account with Frontier, but you can buy Frontier with almost any healthy store or grocery store. Look on, and you can also surf Amazon, even though I don't like to, say Amazon, but you can look for quality ingredients. Spice Trekkers is another company that carries all kinds of spices of everything you want. So you can really get, if you're smarter than me, you can get really quality vanillas and really quality vanilla beans and, the whole nutmegs. But Spice Trekkers I go to for my really specialty things. Frontier Spices I go to for pretty much everything that I need. But then there's some, you can get Simply Organic. I'm not sure it's all that organic. They may have the label, but to me, organic doesn't mean anything anymore. It's just a term. It's the company and the quality and the ingredients. So again, company, quality, ingredients. So anything you buy, what's the first thing you do? Turn it to the back and read what's inside of it. Because you can look on the front and it'll say organic and farm fresh and naturally raised and all GMO free, and they have all these things. And I find so many companies, I turn it around and look at the label, I'm like, it's got stuff in it that I won't eat. It's got palm oil, and it's got soybean oil, it's got organic soybean oil. I'm like, I don't think so. So it's just, you kind of have to read a little bit. That's important. And think about, who do you want to spend your money with? Because your dollar is your power. Your dollar has all the power in the world. And wherever you choose to spend that dollar is you're saying, I like you, I vote for you, I want you to be successful, and I want you to keep on selling this stuff to my children and my grandchildren and everybody on this planet. That's what your dollar says. Your dollar says, I'm voting for you, and I want you to succeed. So that's where you really have to come home to, who do you want to spend your dollar with? So I try to do it local, I try to do it seasonal. There's lots of things here, and I would love to have a few questions before we end and taste some of my cobblers and stuff. Questions? Who likes cobbler? Oh, good. Thanks. That's a good thing. Anybody like apple cake? Good. So the apple cake is a lighter, fluffier with Glen's apples, and the cobbler is berries that were grown at Little Acres, not too far from here, about halfway between Bent Mountain and Copper Hill. And the blueberries were also grown there. And the flowers came from, I forget the name of the town. I meet him in Roanoke. But Deep Roots Milling, the flowers. Excuse me? It's the name of the company is Deep Roots Milling, and he still has a water mill, and his flowers are just amazing. When you use these, you think, oh, how do I ever use that stuff in the grocery store anymore? If you have to get something, King Arthur is one of the better ones, but I get really picky about my flowers. And the Einkorn's Bluebird Company is one of the companies I really like. And you can watch videos about their farming practices, and you say, you know what? I want to give you my money. I want you to win. I want you to succeed. And when I sell their products in the shop, I make zero money because the shipping's so much, and I don't care. I want them to win. Yes?
What is your opinion on leaving the peel on apples and pears?
I personally like to leave the peel because the peel has the nutrients. The peel is the best part. Some people are more purists, like his sister who bakes the bread. She wants to measure by the gram, and they want their desserts to look. But the peel does have a different texture, and peel will make it a little more mealy, and the peel may make the appearance a little bit different. So some people see that and they don't like it as much. I personally like the peel. So I wouldn't peel any fruit except for the pawpaw, and I eat the pawpaw right there, like, because it's so good. It's the best thing ever. You guys have a special treat here with that. Are there any other questions? Oh, and pawpaws are great to make cobblers and crisp with. Excuse?
You mean create those in your shop? I know they're only come out because I've never heard
They're so good, and the reason they're not commercially shipped is because they can't ship them. And I think that saved this fruit. It saved the fruit from us ruining it. You know, I mean, I would never eat a red delicious apple if you paid me, because I don't even care if they say it's organic. It's been sent from New York and sitting in a cool warehouse for a year before I got it. You know, and they don't. Have you ever bitten one from a grocery store? They don't taste like anything, and they're $1.50 a piece. And I'm like, it tastes like nothing. You know, so I'm not quite sure why they do that whole conundrum. But pawpaws, they can't ship, they can't do it. You got to eat them here and you got to grow them here, and they're amazing. But they're a pain to peel, and they're a pain to seed. He did it all for me. Oh. So, any other questions?
I've done that before. Freezing apples, I froze them.
You can freeze everything you want. Absolutely. Works perfect.
Anybody else?
We probably have still 20 or 30 bags of frozen blackberries and blueberries because we just got so much from the farm. And freezing actually retains the nutrients even more than canning. So, yeah. That's the brand of milk and buttermilk that I saw at the store, but you can find it other places. They're Amish people from about 2 hours away that do it. Just after you drink the milk, you won't drink anything else, or the buttermilk.
So there is some in the village.
I sell it at the shop. I think they sell it at Harvest Moon. If you go to their, they have a Facebook page or their website. It shows you all the stores that sell it around here. I think there's about 10 stores that carry it. But they're real farmers. I mean, they pull up in the farm truck, you know, and they're just funny. They're hilarious. It's, you know, it's not like dealing with the regular. The one thing about my shop is you will never, as long as I own this shop, see a Cisco truck or a US Foods truck ever pull up in that parking lot. But you will see a lot of beat up old farm trucks pull up there. So it's kind of fun dealing with these people. I'm like, you guys realize I got to hurry up, and they're not in a rush at all. And I'm always in a rush. So other questions? I'm sorry, what, baby?
Your apples from like tiny colors if you're throwing them in the freezer.
I couldn't hear you.
Like your apples tiny colors in the freezer, just like bananas or
Mhm.
stuff like that. When you put them in the freezer.
They get kind of brown.
So is there a way to not?
Well, if you have an apple that's exposed to air, it's going to start getting brown. But if you use a little bit of lemon juice, it'll keep that from happening as much. But for frozen, I just let them get brown, and you're just going to bake with them anyway. The ones at the bottom of my cake are probably brown. Yeah, so, you know. And frozen bananas work great. They're great for smoothies. They're great for anything. So just freeze them. Yeah. Okay, so I think that's as much as I could possibly tell you, except for this poor apple's going to get eaten by me tonight because I'm not going to waste her. Thank you, Glenn, for the apples. But we have some samples for you to try. And I have a few things for sale if you want some granola, flour, or my favorite book ever. We went to this farm, Antique Apples. It's got 1 million things to know about apples, and it's so beautiful to understand the history of so many apples. I only brought 2 tonight, but my husband actually grew up on an apple farm in Kansas with how many acres? 600 acres of apples. And that's a lot of apples to deal with. And so he's picky about his apples, and he likes Glenn's apples. So he's uber picky. But that company, they were the nicest people to go and meet them and talk to them and learn about so many varieties of apples. And what happens in a grocery store is we get seduced to this low gene pool of common fruit that ships well, stores well, and grows easily, and is usually full of water. I'm going to add one last comment, and then I promise I'll wrap it up. The most interesting thing I found here is if you go to the grocery store and you buy potatoes, and I cut a lot of food, okay? I cut every day, half a day. And you cut a potato, it just cuts in half. But I bought potatoes from Field's Edge, and potatoes from Riverstone, and potatoes from Patchwork. Those things are hard to cut. They're dense. They're not just watery. So produce that's grown by big companies, that's grown and sold in the grocery store, is often mostly just moisture and fast. And I'm really learning as I'm using all these local produces how much more dense they are. The potatoes are hard to cut because they're dense, they're stout, they take longer to cook. They've taken a little harder trip, but the beauty of the taste is tenfold. And again, I'm paying my dollar to somebody I want to win. I want them to win. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time. If you have some more questions, I'll be hanging out. And we have cobbler and apple cake and ice cream for you to try. So thank you for coming. Thank you. And enjoy your little recipes.